With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, normally when we bring him on, he is going to explain Congress to us because he works in the halls of power. He covers the Senate. He covers the House. All the comings and goings of the power brokers, but that's not why Eric Garcia is here today. We're going to do the other thing he does. He researches, he advocates, and he's written one book already. He's working on another one on autism. And that's what we're going to talk about today because we have had a sea change in how autism is going to be discussed in this country just recently. Eric, great to have you back, buddy.
Thanks very much, man. It's good to have you. Good to be with you.
I like discussing this topic with you, but I wish we weren't doing this today. Can I just be upfront? Because
let's be upfront. Yeah, no, I have a lot of thoughts about it.
I'm gonna start right here, and then we're gonna back up because we're actually gonna walk through the history of the last 50 years of autism because people are lying about what happened.
Yes,
I want to start right here though because, and the reason I say it's a sea change is, I know it's online. I know it's in literature. I know it's on mom post books on Facebook. I know it's on discussion boards. For the President of the United States and his health secretary in a cabinet meeting to say, well, of course, autism is artificially created.
Yes.
That's really the Rubicon that set a lot of people off, me included. And I tweeted it and I said, that there goes 50 years of progress. Because when those people say that and give credence to that, am I being hyperbolic? Because that's sure how I felt.
No, you are not being hyperbolic whatsoever. So let's back up. So, you know, in the past, in the 1990s and the 2000s, when Andrew Wakefield, the British physician, put out his study and in the Lancet, you know, placing it, you know, speculating about a tie between vaccines and autism, it was somewhat understandable that this was that this would be something that was entering the sphere. You know, Barack Obama speculated about it on the campaign trail. John McCain did, but that was because that was just generally that was out there, and it hadn't been. And then only a few years later, Wakefield lost his medical license, and then that Lancet study got retracted. And for those who don't know, the Lancet is, I think it's fair to say, the premier British medical journal. And therefore one of the most premier journals in the world. But to have the president of the United States and his HHS secretary say that is unconscionable. And so this is the point that I want to make. And you made this point, but I'm going to say it. When parents get a diagnosis of autism, they should be able, you know, when you go to the psychiatrist and, you know, you've gone through the ringer, you know, multiple evaluations, screenings, and everything, you know, you should be able to trust that that government websites are credible. And what I think and now when they go on these websites or when they hear the president of the United States say it's artificially created, look, for better or for worse, we know that Donald Trump is a liar, but we should be able to trust our government with accurate health information. And when the president of the United States and when the HHS secretary says, this is going to, you say it erodes 50 years of progress, it's going to lead parents down a rabbit hole of bad information and faulty treatments. And, you know, what's funny, what's sad about it is that when I talk to parents, you know, and I go to these book events that they say like, and I've talked to my parents about it, you know, they're like, oh, I feel so bad that we tried so many things for our kid that didn't work before we just ultimately realized we needed to accept them. And I'm like, no, you shouldn't feel bad because, you know, you were working with the best information you had at the time. And I think about how many parents are going to subject their kids to BS treatments or therapies, or they're going to blame the vaccines, or they're going to blame, you know, something artificial in the environment, or the lead, or whatever RFK Jr. is talking about, whatever given moment. And it's going to take away from them focusing on helping their kids live happy lives. And it's going to, and you know, there's some studies out there. There's some really interesting studies. There's a study from one of the professors at the University of Virginia, who's become a great friend of mine. that non-speaking autistic people understand what people are saying just as much as speaking autistic people, even those with intellectual disabilities. And they might have to take time processing, but they still understand it. And think about what that's going to do and how corrosive that is going to be to autistic people as a whole. And so this is just going to mislead so many autistic people and their loved ones. It is going to lead to them falling down rabbit holes and wasting time that could be spent helping autistic people. And it's just, and it's coming from the highest authority in the land. That's the 10,000 foot view on it.
And the reason that is so apparent, you just touched on it, is the parents.
Yes.
Because when autism first started being separated out from other things, we need to go through the history of this. So this is a perfect way to get into the history of it. And again, Eric's wrote a book on this. I can't show you my copy because I actually sent it to my mom, and my mom has it. And she loved it, by the way. Mom Donaldson approved.
Thank you so much.
You're Not Broken. We're going to put links to it. I'm going to be quoting from it a couple times during this conversation. Make sure you go buy it. You're working on another book. We'll talk about that later. Because this originally started, and one of the things that set back the progress on autism in the first place, and the reason we didn't really get serious studies on this separately until the 80s,
yes,
is because it was considered not a child development problem. It was considered a bad parenting problem. Explain refrigerator mom. Explain coldness, because that's where this whole thing starts. And we're just doing a big old circle right back to that again.
We're you go back. So it's important to remember that in 1943, the first widely read study in the United States was done by a guy named Leo Connor up at Johns Hopkins University. And while Connor said that, there was something inherent and innate about how children are unable, these children can't connect. They also said that he also said that a lot of them come from cold or unloving families. Then there was a guy by the name of Bruno Bettelheim, who was in many ways a fabulist. He led the orthogenic school in Chicago, and he was the person who really postulated this idea that it was refrigerator mothers who caused autism. It was then considered childhood schizophrenia, and that's an important thing. We're going to say that. And it wasn't until the 1960s and 70s that that was debunked and put in the trash heap, thanks to people like Bernard Rimland and Ruth Croix Sullivan, who you probably know was a great West Virginian. And the reason why West Virginia was actually on the cutting edge of so much when it came to autism was because of Ruth Croix Sullivan. And she focused extensively on making sure that, because there was a real divide among parents at the time, do we focus on curing, or do we focus on helping autistic people live more fulfilling lives, like her son, Joe Sullivan, who was one of the inspirations for Rain Man, I should note. And so that push led to that kind of being debunked by these kinds of parents who advocated. And then what happened was so this really is, you're right, it goes all the way back. It's kind of going back, we're going all the way back to blaming parents, blaming doctors, blaming some outside force. And the reason why that's so important is, to get a little meta about it, is that in the 1970s, there was the larger disability rights movement. A lot of people saw the documentary Crip Camp. I recommend everybody watch it on Netflix, where disability rights activists literally park themselves in front of in their wheelchairs in the federal building to get the 504 regulations put in place. But because autism was seen as a parent problem, it was not seen as something that required collective action, required protection for rights or things like that, and that led to it means that autism is just behind the curve, or is about 20 years behind the rest of the disability rights movement in terms of protections or in terms of rights or things like that. And it's kind of ironic that RFK Jr., the nephew of Ted Kennedy, who helped write the ADA, is setting things back for people with disabilities. And I think I also want to point this out. This is what I'm going to show. I'm going to get really meta about it, and you can show this on the clips or whatever. While I'm doing this, I'm using my stim toy. I'm using this thing right here. I got it at a conference. And so RFK Jr. has talked extensively about stimming, and he talks about how it's a symptom. And it's like, he talks about toe walking. the only way I can really do my job and I can really get through the day is if I have something to stim with. As an autistic person, that is the way I deal with sensory overload. It's the way I process my thoughts. As you see, I'm not making real eye contact with you. It's so that I can say what I'm thinking and say what I'm doing, and so I can actually do my job. And so when RFK Jr. stigmatizes stimming, he's making it harder for autistic people to live throughout the world. So that's a long-winded answer. And so to your point, when you say, we're going back 50 years, it's important to remember, and we were talking about this before we went on, autism did not get a separate diagnosis from childhood schizophrenia until 1980 in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is kind of the Bible for diagnoses in the US. So it's important to remember just how relatively recent all of this is.
It's not only recent, but because of the way autism was done and it was blamed on the parents, the research for autism was stunted.
Yes.
And part of this history, and I'm walking through this history on purpose because RFK Jr. and Trump and these people are going like, well, it wasn't like this 50 years ago. No, it wasn't. And there's a reason for it.
Yes.
In 1968, they first started trying to diagnose it, but they called what we now know as autism spectrum as childhood schizophrenia.
Yes.
So when people like my mom, who started being a special ed teacher in 1969,
correct,
they knew what Down syndrome was. They had a pretty good handle on that. And
yes,
from the 60s until today, the life expectancy of Down syndrome has doubled. It's almost 1-for-1. It's just under. It's like 69.8. If you ask my mom and the special ed teachers of that era, the pioneers of special education, that's the thing they're the most proud of. Is like, hey, just letting them go to school and have normal lives, we doubled life expectancy.
Yes.
But the autism spectrum kids, they had them. They were in their class. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know what to call it because in 68, they diagnosed this as childhood schizophrenia, and it became a condition where people were institutionalized.
Yes.
And it wasn't until the institutions went away in the 80s and we went to what we now call rehab or inpatient and that thing. When the institutions started going away in the 80s and were completely gone by the early 90s, that's when autism actually started getting studied, because before that, if your kid had childhood schizophrenia, they just were institutionalizing them. It put everything back 20, 30 years.
Thank you so much for you just teed up what I was going to say, so I really appreciate you. So it's that is so important, because when RFK Jr. says there are no homes, you never saw people with full-blown autism, in the streets, things like that. It's like, there are no homes. It's like, yeah, Mr. Secretary, it was because they were classified as schizophrenic. It's funny. So one of my good friends, it's somebody who's become a friend of mine, David Mandel, who's a doctor over at the University of Pennsylvania. He's actually done research into this, and he went through a lot of the archives at one of the state hospitals in Pennsylvania, and he found that he looked at the case studies and the case files, and he found that a lot of the people who would now be classified as autistic were in those state hospitals and state institutions. It's just that we thought they had mental disorders, we thought they had schizophrenia. So the other thing is that a lot of them were previously diagnosed as just having an intellectual disability, what we would then call mental retardation. So it's important to remember that this was misclassification. It's also important to remember that many girls went undiagnosed. A lot of people of color, a lot of Black children were diagnosed as having oppositional defiant disorder or behavioral disorders. So the closing of the gap is so important to contextualize with the study, because Trump and RFK Jr. say, well, it was only 1 in 10,000, only a few years ago. Well, first off, they're outdated. That was like 40, 50 years ago now. Second of all, yes, it was then, but it was because autism had a very narrow diagnosis. Remember, Asperger's syndrome was not included in the DSM until 1994, and then we only got what's now considered autism spectrum disorder until in 2013. So that's only 12 years ago. So again, this is like the broadening of the spectrum is so important. And then again, the other thing that's important to take into account, there's a great academic study from 2005, I believe, that's like 3 reasons why there's not an autism epidemic. So this has been researched, and it's on the NIH website, Mr. Secretary. But it also noted that in 1990, and you know this, in 1973, 74, there was the Education for Handicapped Children Act that basically guaranteed the right to an education. And then in 1990, it was reauthorized as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And what it did is it said that students are entitled to a FAPE, which is a free, appropriate public education. And autism was included on that. So what did that mean? It meant that schools had to send the data to the federal government of all the students that it served. Well, guess what? That's how a lot of students started getting detected through their school therapists, counselors, principals, and that was when you started to see the diagnosis rate explode. And it's actually, this is the important thing I want to say, the kind of concurrence of expanding diagnostic criteria and the proper reporting to public policy is actually, believe it or not, kind of a miracle of a perfect marriage of public policy and science. And we risk eroding that now, because the problem was that in the 90s, we saw these increased diagnosis rates, and we immediately thought, epidemic. No, it means we were doing our job.
Yeah, and everything's a conspiracy if you don't understand it, but conspiracies always get lost after usually the second question. You just hit on the thing that kills a lot of this conspiracy thing is, we didn't start collecting the data, meaning the government, which is how everybody gets their data. Most data comes academically in the federal government. You know, we're going to explain how all that works later. We didn't start collecting this data until 30 years ago. Correct. We've had the diagnosis and the understanding of what the autism spectrum is less than we've had smartphones. That's how new all this is. Like the conspiracy theory is, oh, it just all popped up. But the piece that goes with those two data points is autism. Unlike a lot of these other things, and I'm using Down syndrome again because in special education courses like what my mom was dealing with teaching these kids, they were put in the same classes, especially the severe ones, especially the nonverbal ones, things like this, people with communication issues. They were all getting lumped in together.
Yes.
So the reason I bring all that up is you take those two data points. We didn't have the data until the early 90s. We've only had the spectrum for about 13 years now, 13, 14 years now. Autism wasn't the science found it. The parents pushed the science to figure out what was going on. Correct. It's kind of a unique way that it got diagnosed in the first place. But the conspiracy theory people go, oh, well, it didn't even create until this. Like, yes, because the science was lagging. And now we've got this ass backwards thing where we're going the other direction and going, oh, now the parents are telling the science is wrong when the only reason the science is right was the parents in the first place.
The parents were advocating for it in the first place. They were desperate to get services for their kids. They were many of them. One of my favorite people to read about is a woman by the name of Lorna Wing, who was a British researcher who had an autistic daughter, and she was one of the people who questioned a lot of that, questioned the idea that it was unloving parents. And she was one of the first people to translate Hans Asperger's research from German to English, because a lot of it had been thought lost to history because of the war. And Hans Asperger was also a collaborator with the Nazis. We should also add that. But this is so incredibly recent, and it was parents who fought for it. It was parents who pushed for the inclusion of it. Then what happened is you had a lot of autistic people who benefited from the ADA and from the IDEA. They grew up and they lobbied more for the government to include them and listen to their needs. We only recently got what's called the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, which is the advisory committee in the federal government. That was like in 2006, 2007. We only started including autistic people on the committee in recent years. Now it's something like half of the committee is autistic themselves, and includes the great thing about it is it includes the entire spectrum. It includes non-speaking people, and it includes speaking people, and it includes people with intellectual disabilities who are autistic. So again, this was hard fought, hard won research, and I have a piece coming out later this week, or that's going to come out over the weekend. I was talking with a professor at Northwestern University, and she was really scared to me. Her name is Molly Losh. All of her grants have been frozen because of the Trump administration's war on higher ed. And she is scared that it's going to erode all this protocol and all this push to get and include autistic people, their loved ones, and their caregivers in the research, and to make sure that they have a say in it. And it's going to literally it's going to roll it back, but it's also going to take it into a step in the wrong direction. I want, a lot of people say, is this a step back? You said, like, I would, the only quibble I would have is, yes, it's a step back, but I would actually argue it's not just a step back, it's a step it's like a complete swerve and pivot in the absolute wrong direction.
What do we do with the conspiracy people that are going to hear everything we just said and still reject it because some viral nonsense? You started this conversation talking about the rabbit hole. Look, I want to be charitable here, but my kids are all grown now. I've dealt with this for a lot. Sorry, parent messaging boards are just the cesspit of humanity. Like, nothing good happens on there. Get off them things.
Yeah.
But what do we do with people who are going to hear, we just spent 15 minutes laying it out. That's all empirical stuff. It's not our opinion. That's how it happened.
Yeah.
And they're just going to go, well, but this politician I really like said this, or my message board said this, or my kid had this reaction to this vaccine and this happened, so that's why they're autistic. What do we do with that? Because I don't think all those people are malicious. I don't think there are. You just said it. Parents go down a rabbit hole when they get desperate.
Yeah.
What do you do to kind of try to reel these folks back? Because, and I'm going to keep bringing this up because this is the key part to the entire autism story. Parents don't want to think something's wrong with their kid because they don't want to think they did something wrong to make their kid that way. And they don't want their kid thinking there's something wrong with them that's their fault.
Yes.
That's the psychosis underneath all this. And that's one reason you titled your book what you titled it, is like, you're not broken. This is just something you got to understand and deal with.
Yeah.
How do we do that in an effective way? Because the book's been out for a couple of years now. You talk to people about this. Give us something practical under all the noise of this thing.
I think what I would say is that, look, there was, you touched on it. At the core of it, I'm not a parent, but like, a lot of my friends are, and I remember like one of my really good friends went through postpartum, and like being a parent is really hard. And when you get a diagnosis, being a parent is one of the things where everybody feels they can make a value judgment on you. So I think so like when a child gets a diagnosis of something like autism, immediately everybody judges, like, have you tried this therapy? Have you put them on this diet? Have you tried this or that? But it's like, no, this is just how it happened. I think what it should say, what the main message is, you did nothing wrong in this. It's genetic. Nothing you did made this happen. And starting from that standpoint, and then saying, there's a huge community of people that you can connect to that have been through this, I think is incredibly valuable. Because the thing of it is again, I said, like, it's an incredibly isolating experience to be a parent. But giving people community, giving people resources, saying that there's other people to support you is, I think, invaluable, especially because systems continue to fail. Parents and autistic people, literally I've talked with, and Andrew, this truth, like literally parents have to put their kids on the Medicaid wait list at like 5, so that by the time they're 21, the clear is queued up so that they can get their Medicaid home and community-based services. So like, look, I admit the systems are failing. So what we need is we need other people we need this autistic community to really kind of surround them. I almost wish, I've talked about this with my really good friend, Sarah Luderman, who's also an autistic journalist. We both said that we almost wish there was almost kind of like a P flag for autistic families, like where it's just like autistic people can connect with newly diagnosed families. One of the, because like, I think that's the starting point, is just recognizing that, look, this is a very, there are not a lot of resources. We understand your frustration. We understand your anger. But we need you to be angry about the lack of services and lack of resources and lack of support, not be angry that your kid is autistic. That's what I would say.
And now this is going to be the grown folk portion of this conversation. So y'all just grab the chair's arm a little harder and just kind of bear down and grin a little bit. It is a thing, and this is a very small minority, but they're a really loud minority. When you have insular groups that start bonding together because all the systems have failed them and nothing's going right, and they feel like the world's against them, and they feel like the government's against them, and they feel like nothing other than somebody that's doing exactly what they're doing can ever understand it, that's also the people that get really, really susceptible to the online nonsense.
Yes.
And they're very, very vulnerable to that without knowing it because they've become so insular and they've been so hurt and they've been so burned that they start grabbing on the things they shouldn't grab onto. And there's a dark part of it. You can't just look, not all advocates are equal.
Yeah.
Some people have gone into some really dark corners with this stuff. And I don't think a majority, I think there's some real bad faith actors like RFK Jr. who's doing it on purpose. We'll talk about him more in a minute. There's some real dark corners to the advocacy world with things like autism. And it comes from that and the social media and the politics and the culture warring. And you put all that on top of it. And it is a very combustible, ugly element.
Yeah, you mentioned the mom message boards, and you mentioned all those things like those were things in the 2000s, the 1990s, and the 2010s. But now you've got the algorithm of like your For You page on TikTok and your and on Instagram. Look, it's fascinating. Like, when I talk with my friends who are new moms, how much kind of wellness stuff just is constantly just fed to them, like just by them knowing that you're like the algorithm knowing that they're a new parent. And so that's a steroid for all those things you mentioned ahead of time. I mean, just now is that, all those things are now existing. And you're right that like, when you are very isolated, it makes you much more susceptible to conspiracy theories and to extremist ideas. And this is the case, I should say, not just for parents of autistic kids. This is a case for anybody that like social isolation breeds extremism. There's a reason why a lot of people fell down COVID rabbit holes, folks. But and a lot of people had their brains broken by COVID. When you feel like you're the only person who does this, who's going through this, that makes it all the easier to feel like to just grasp at straws. And that's what allows for charlatans like Secretary Kennedy to step in, is that it's out of desperation. And I think so. What I would say is the antidote to separation and desperation is meeting other people who are going through just the exact same thing you're going through, validating that, look, yes, getting an IEP is hell. Getting your doing the 504 meetings is just a mountain of paperwork. Making sure that your kid is able to get on Social Security, Supplemental Security Income, SSI, is a maze, and it sometimes requires you getting a lawyer, and a lot of times it means getting rejected the first time and then paying for a lawyer. So all of this, I think, is acknowledging it and then saying, but the problem isn't the kid. The problem is that the system is failing and we need to work to make the system better. So I think that's the easiest thing. The easiest thing is, again, to just connect people. So
what do we do with the political version of this? Because fired up advocates make really good political allies.
We do.
That's just a fact. Look, this Make America Healthy Again stuff that the vaccine and the autism and all that's gotten lumped in with because it's all one big thing. Look, that's a political maneuver for purpose because it's ready-made it's a network that's already made and ready to go and you tapped into it. What do we do with the political part of this? Because I'm old enough to remember when, the GOP was horrified by telling people what to eat. And now that's the standard of this administration. They're going to tell everybody what to eat, what to drink, et cetera, et cetera. When you start dealing with things like autism, when you start dealing with things like vaccines, all this other stuff, how do we deal with the political component of it? Because and I want to ask it to you this way, you are in Congress pretty much daily when session is in. The way Congress works is the staffers do all the stuff. They funnel it up to the Congress people or the senator, and then the senator says it. But that came through their team of people that did a bunch of research or depending on things, lobbyists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The machine behind the government is where the rubber meets the road on tapping into those draw that line for folks. So when they see the headlines and see the movements of people, that's how that's working. Give us the political backstory on how these things have changed. 'Cause you've been there long enough. You've seen it change in Congress the last few years.
Yeah, no, I absolutely have. Like, I think I'll give you an example is that one time I was in a senator's office. I was getting ready to interview them. And the thing that helped was there was this one disability rights advocate. I'm not going to say who it was because I know her. But then she was meeting with the senator to talk about the marriage penalty. For those who don't know, if you're on supplemental security income, SSI, if you get married, you could lose your benefits because it's joint income and it's above the asset limit. And the point that I want to make about it is that you need people as fired up about those problems with the systems as you do need people who are as fired up about the vaccines, and you actually need them to be even louder because it's a lot more difficult because you said the MAHA network has its whole that network already exists. And I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be much more integrated networks. One of the things a lot of people misunderstand, they think a lot of people get the misunderstanding that I'm anti-parent. I'm not anti-parent. In fact, I've always said that to make a better world for autistic people, we do kind of need like a symphony. And look, everybody has their place in the symphony. There's the autistic self-advocates who, would be like the wind instruments, and the parents are the drums. They're the loudest ones. They're the ones who drive the beat. There's going to be social workers and advocates. So everybody has a role. And I think what they need to do is they need to be reading out of the same sheet music and saying and banging the drum. And it needs to, and again, to the point that you made, is that there are more people who just want to do the right thing than there are just the loudest voices in the room. They just need to actually get in the room, and they actually need to make sure that they are counteracting and every talking point from the MAHA conspiratorial folks. They need to be, and more than that, they need to get in before the MAHA folks start meeting with staffers and lobbyists and lawmakers. Staffers and lawmakers and committee members and things like that. They need to get in on the ground floor from the beginning. So.
And that's the traditional way you do it. But right now, this is coming directly from President Trump and the White House.
Yes.
That's the change, because now it's not bottom-up pressure, traditional lobbying, that sort of thing. It's RFK Jr. is sitting at the cabinet meeting and says it to Trump, and Trump says it. So you don't have any downward pressure. Just everybody knows, oh, Trump said it, I've got to back it up now. Yeah. That's the change.
Yeah, exactly. That's where, I don't want to be too much of a doomer, but that's kind of the rub at this moment, is that you have two people with incredibly large megaphones. And, as we're talking about this on Thursday morning. Just last night, there was a whole slew of people at the CDC who resigned, and the Trump administration tried to fire their own CDC director, so that Trump himself nominated. So they, literally a month ago, she came into the job, and so I think that's the difficult part, is that at this moment, what I've said, and I've talked about this, is that as of right now, given the unreliability of the federal government, these networks are going to need to become stronger. They're going to kind of need to need to build their own kind of backup default networks. There's groups like the autistic scientists. There's a group of autism researcher scientists who created their own consortium, really to kind of refute RFK Jr. There's the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. For the love of God, a perfect example, for those who don't know, after RFK Jr. gave his whole Autism Destroys Families thing, there was a joint statement between Autism Speaks and the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. For those who don't realize, that's kind of the equivalent of the ACLU and the Federalist Society getting together on something. So yeah, these networks are just going to have to become stronger to refute the talking points. So.
What are the advocacy groups doing? You're saying there was a detente between, the East and the West there for a minute. I don't think that'll last long term, because they also have separate fundraising networks, but that's another matter for another day. What do you see happening in the advocacy world? Because the political world and the online media and the news media and social media, that's all entwined. That's all going one direction right now. Yeah. The actual advocacy people, their traditional advocacy, they're almost analog in a digital world. They're having a hard time keeping up. What are they doing right now, because it seems to me, this is an outside opinion, you tell me if it's wrong, it feels like they've almost had to be like, okay, we can't just be fundraising networks anymore. We have to figure out how to do actual more advocacy. We have to do PR now. Because most of those, and this isn't a slam, this is the business.
No.
90% of their time is fundraising. That's what they're built to do. And now they're like, we can't fundraise because we can't message because nobody's listening to our message. Do you see that change coming?
That is so. I think it's you touched on it. There are some people like who are actually getting smart about it and getting to create PR and messaging. But you're right. A lot of it was messaging, and it's important to remember the disability rights movement as a whole was designed to be bipartisan by nature. It's funny. I interviewed for a piece I did. I did an interview with Hy Feldblum, who was a former worker who was a lawyer at the ACLU, who got along with Bob Dole in passing the ADA. Understand this, a queer Jewish lesbian who worked at the ACLU was working with Republicans like Bob Dole. So that it's just a lot different. I think the other factor that a lot of people don't recognize is a lot of the disability rights advocates, a lot of them died during COVID. So a lot of the most effective voices just unfortunately are no longer with us anymore. And third, I think the other thing to take into account is that you're right. They don't have they also just, a lot of their old friends in government just no longer are there anymore. So it makes it harder to have a sympathetic ear. So they have to completely revamp their strategy in a way that I don't think they necessarily understood. Some of them recognize that they need to talk to folks like me in the media. But it's a very slow train coming, and I think it's only now really picking up steam.
We need to pause here and go back because the kids don't know what we're talking about. Bob Dole, who nobody ever accused of being anything but a staunch hardline conservative, because that's who the guy was.
Yes.
Go watch the video. His arms jacked up. He made it about 10 minutes up the hill in Italy and got machine gunned. They didn't think he was going to live.
Yes.
He actually thought his arm was missing. That's how paralyzed he was from the neck down. He ends up surviving against all the odds. They didn't think he was going to live. He ends up in the same military hospital with Daniel Ione, of all people.
Yes.
And they become lifelong friends. He's a Democrat. Bob Dole's a Republican. And that life experience is actually the genesis of getting the ADA through decades later. You got to walk people through this because bipartisanship has disappeared. But in the old, I hate to be the old guy, the old way of doing things, but those guys disagreed on everything politically. They were both World War II vets. They were both combat wounded guys. Daniel was extremely decorated. They had that one shared experience. And then when Bob Dole would meet somebody later in life that didn't go with his politics, if you told them there was a disability angle to him, he turned the politics off and listened. Yeah. This is a foreign concept to probably anybody under the age of 40 right now, and especially anybody under about 30 that's been on social media and that's how they've seen politics. This is foreign. We need to go back and re-educate folks that this is how things like the ADA got done. Yes. George H.W. Bush, who got shot down, he understood it. Like he listened to this.
George H.W. Bush, who got shot down, worked on a bill with liberal Ted Kennedy because Ted Kennedy's son had his leg amputated on this. The only way, the fact that you could get George H.W. Bush, Ted Kennedy, Bob Dole, and Tom Harkin in the room and work on something, and Major Owens, and Tony Coelho, and Steve Bartlett, who was the Republican leader on that one, who was a former Dallas congressman. The fact you could only get that because they all had these kind of integrated experiences. And you're right, there was an integrated ground network. And like it was funny, last year, my friend Sarah Luder remembered the story about like how the RNC didn't invite the AAPD to have a booth at the RNC, and it was like, and I was saying, to the point that I said like a lot of the most effective advocates are now dead either by age or because of disability or whatever. I said, oh man, if this was 30 years ago, a lot of the disability rights advocates would have got a bunch of veterans and had them park their wheelchairs in front of the RNC in Wisconsin. So yeah, I think a lot of it is also a lot of the new blood. They're skilled in their own way, but the old guard knew how to be a little bit more tactical. So They got things done. So that's the point that I want to make, is right now it's so difficult because you don't have those sympathetic ears, and because you talk about staff and you talk about turnover and things like that. It used to be and this is my argument, that we should pay congressional staffers more so that we get actual experts staffing congressional offices. Is that it used to be that you used to have people who were experts in there for a long time. Now you've got this turnover, and because pay is so low on the health thing, the only people who can afford to be staffers for members of Congress are Nepo babies who spend all their time on 4chan. So that makes it even more difficult to get to move the needle and move the boulder up the hill.
Yeah, but culturally, this is important to discuss, because I don't want to say this. The way Congress deals with stuff, they still make the laws.
Yes.
But we're not making laws anymore. It's very much pushed down, and this is getting to be bipartisan. The executive has become so strong. You get these wild swings, and when you have policy, like we're seeing this with foreign policy, but medical policy does not run on election cycles.
No.
And what we're seeing now is every time we have a new president of a different party, are we going to have a swing against medical research, for and against? That's the danger of this stuff, is like, that shouldn't really go based on it. But now higher education, research places, medical, they're already planning. I've talked to them. I've seen them do it. They're like, well, we're not even going to try to do any grant block research until the end of the Trump administration, because there's no point.
Yeah,
that's not good.
That's not good. And then also the other point that I should really emphasize is that a lot of the places, you understand this, Andrew, is that like the block grant research props up a lot of small towns especially in Republican states, like in Birmingham, Alabama, especially in West Virginia. The universities prop up the economy there. I still said Joe should have taken over WVU, but that's another topic for another day. But you're right. Like, I mean, at this point, public medical research, and again, for whatever criticisms people have, we still are the global leader in health, folks. America is still the global leader in health because of our universities, our centers for research, all of that. At this point, I've said this, and I've talked, again, I work for British Paper. I've said that, the rest of Europe needs to start prepping its public health stuff so that the global health public infrastructure isn't reliant on a handful of voters in Wisconsin and Nevada.
I just thought of this. This is why I like talking to you, and I like doing this format, because we can go through this. My grandfather's generation, I'm a little gender gap, but the Bob Dole, George H.W. Bush, Daniel Ione, that generation, their formative thing was the Depression and World War II.
Yes.
My dad's generation was, the 60s, the turmoil of the 60s, Vietnam, that kind of era. And then they became adults during the 70s and 80s. And then they raised kids during the 80s and 90s like me. And my dad was a very peaceful man, but he could get angry at me because I could do that to people. Love you, Dad. I'm just teasing. Yeah. But the formative experience of the current generation is not a war, and it's not a depression. It's COVID.
Yes.
Everybody under 30, and a lot of parents, because it disproportionately whacked the parents. And of course, elderly, the death rate was higher, but that's a little different. COVID was formative and it fed into all this conspiratorial stuff because people were lied to and they were mistreated, and it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense that you can go to the grocery store across the street, but if you go to the school, the government's telling you you're going to drop dead walking in the building. That doesn't make sense. That broke the public trust. You had doctors that decided they wanted to be TV stars. That was wrong. It was bad. We found out the scientific community does not know how to talk to normal human beings. That's bad.
Right.
But we didn't learn the lessons of let's go fix the bad. And too many people say, okay, this is now my formative event on looking at everything. And it means everybody's always lying to me all the time. And that wasn't the lesson. That's the difference. They don't have that rally around the flag formative moment or the 9/11 for my generation. They have COVID where it was like, no, we're all going to go to our separate corners and yell about this. That's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, and instead of, I mean, because the right response after COVID should have been, okay, look, there were some things we got dead wrong. There were some other things we got right. And, again, one of the things that President Trump deserves all the credit in the world for is Operation Warp Speed. It was a miracle private-public partnership. But the right approach would be, okay, these are the things we did right, we did wrong, kind of do a post game, similar to the Pentagon has their analyses after wars that are usually some of the most comprehensive and some of the most critical of the military are the Pentagon's own reports because they don't want to repeat the same mistakes. But instead what's happened is instead of that, there's just been a war on public health rather than fixing what happened, what got wrong in public health, and making sure we're better prepared for the next pandemic because we were not prepared the last time. And the worst thing is that we're going to be even less prepared come the next pandemic. And look, every other year there's a very bad viral flu season. I think a few years ago it was like in St. Louis, it got really bad and their hospitals were overwhelmed. Eventually there's going to be an outbreak somewhere and it's going to be bad. So.
And that was another one of those conspirators. And it's like, look, the flu went away. Yeah, because nobody was around anybody.
Yes, exactly.
Conspiracies, man, kill me. I want to get back to the autism for a second, and I want to talk about your book because I think there's a couple of quotes from your books I went and pulled out.
Thank you.
Again, I've read it. It's excellent. I actually read it twice because I read it once for prep, and I was like, I actually want to read through this a little deeper. You had one quote that got pulled out. It's been used in some of the media packages. A couple of the reviewers use this. So I don't know if you gave it to them or not. But I think it gets to the heart of why autism is so hard to talk about and the conspiracy story. And I'm quoting you here is like, we don't know what autism in and of itself looks like. We only know autism is informed by the trauma that presents itself.
Yeah.
I want to go through this slow because I don't want to lose people. We as a society and especially medical science is just starting to understand trauma and understanding that trauma is the force multiplier to a whole lot of other mental health issues. Like almost all problems with people mentally, there's some kind of trauma that exacerbated, if not directly caused it. That's its own branch of science. That's something I go to mental health for, trauma, right? Being raised autistic or any kind of thing like autism or any kind of challenge like that, it causes trauma because people don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
But then we lump it all under one heading of, oh, you're autistic, you're bipolar, you're whatever. And they just want to deal with that one piece of it. Yeah. But there's the trauma component too. And it's really hard to figure out where one ends and the other begins. It becomes this chicken and egg thing. Talk people through that because the reason the kids get so damaged and the parents are so frustrated and the parents end up damaged and the government can't write a law to fix this in one fell swoop is that right there. It all goes together.
Yeah, I want to give credit where it's due. It was funny because Cal Montgomery, who's an autistic disability rights advocate, I know, I interviewed him for that. He was the one who told me, yeah, we don't know what autism looks like. We just know what autism with trauma looks like. And that was the quote that stuck with me the most when I was doing all these interviews and things like that. And it's like, yeah, we don't know what it looks like, but we just know what autism with trauma looks like. And I think that's what to circle it back, we're going to get a lot of autistic kids. It's going to, they're going to be, I really hope when this all ends, there's some PhD students and some academics who survey kids who got a diagnosis during the RFK administration of HHS, just to see like what kind of trauma they went through, what kind of, how it affected them, how it affected their parents, what kind of, did it lead them down what kind of rabbit holes, because we don't know. And again, this is the point that I keep on making. We're wasting valuable time. We have so many, again, I keep on saying this, like, we have so many incredible resources with our universities, our health institutions, we have some of the best researchers who come to the United States to research. And now, because of our war on H-1Bs and our war on immigration, we're actually compromising that. But it's going to erode all that. And again, you're right. We're not going to be, we're going to wind up, because of whatever the hell RFK believes about when he sees people with mitochondrial imbalances when he's at the airport, he's gonna lump all these things together rather than there's gonna be focus on what's trauma and what's autism.
My dad had a term teaching school with dealing with parents and stuff. He called them maliciously benevolent.
Yes.
You talk about that quite a bit in a couple different places in the book, but one of the things you did, you called them tropes as a problem, tropes as a source knowledge.
Yeah.
On this stuff. One of the problems going on right now is autism, the stereotype memes really well, and autism, the people don't know how to do memes.
Yeah, no, they don't. I mean, some of them do, but like some of them are really good. Again, like the internet wouldn't exist without autistic people. But the thing that I would say is that like the kind of ability to just create this kind of feedback loop that the parents have. Just because they have the mom blog networks, they have all the followers, they have the Facebook message boards. Now they have TikTok accounts and they have Instagram pages, and they have YouTube channels. It's just a supercharged engine for that now. And so it's just, again, to the point is that because a lot of autistic people themselves are low income, they're poor. A lot of them are on Medicaid. They don't necessarily have the means to do exactly what, upper income, conspiracy theory mongering folks have.
The benevolent problem. Look, if you were going to have a poster child for the maliciously benevolent, it would be RFK Jr. And I don't want to pick on him too far. His back history is pretty much an open book. Go Google it, guys. He's some of the stuff in his life, and this is going to sound like an attack, and he deserves some of it, but I don't really mean it personally, although I find him despicable. I really don't. When he says stuff like, I never saw this and I came from a big family. Yeah, because your grandfather had your aunt lobotomized.
Yes.
You had a heroin addiction to deal with your problems. I'm glad you've been sober. Look, not attacking him. You and me both. If I'm talking out of school, I'll edit it. You and me both have had our addiction issues.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm not judging you for that. I'm glad. I've been sober 21 years. I'm glad you've had 40 years of sobriety. God bless. But that's not the standard to do this kind of stuff. So he is the absolute poster child for the benevolent person who may think he's helping, although I've got a money train that says he's doing it for personal gain too.
Oh yeah, I know the exact thing you're talking about.
This is the poster child for what you're talking about the people that come in the name of benevolence and they're doing great harm.
Yeah, exactly. And again, Kennedy started out as an environmental lawyer. That was the whole way he got into this thing. And then now he's kind of, this is a guy who has no public health understanding and public health research or training. He's an environmental lawyer. And now he's the top public health official in the United States. That's really concerning. So,
to get him to stop running for president, by the way.
Yes, exactly. Yes, precisely. Yes, exactly. That was the payoff. That was the payoff from Trump. So.
What do we do with the benevolent folks? Because they're never going to go away. There's always going to be some rich person who has a personal experience. And I believe JFK on this. And I don't think he's, all the way evil, although he does some evil stuff, in my opinion. I think his addiction stuff did set his mind to certain things. I think he really did go on the voyage of discovery to try to figure out why he was the way he was. I think he went down the wrong path on it. But there's always going to be people like that. There's always going to be the people that's like, well, my child experienced this, therefore this is true, and I'm going to make it everybody's problem. What do we do with that? Because personal experience is really hard to argue against.
It is really hard to argue against. I think what I would say is that, again, I would start by not dismissing their personal experience, but what I would say is like, your experience is your experience and I won't invalidate it, but it doesn't necessarily mean, but sometimes we misunderstand, we're given bad information, we're only working with the information that we have, so that your experience isn't invalidated, but we just had a misunderstanding of it at the time, and our understanding of the facts changes drastically over time, and that's a good thing. So then that way you're not invalidating people's experience, but you're actually reinforcing and saying, we hear you, there was just a misunderstanding at the time.
I want to make it personal this way, is like how hard it is to understand all this and why you always have to take the step back and take the big picture view on this and not just get in, you called it the feedback loop. And I just know this because we've been friends for a while, and I was interested when you did the first book. You sat down to write the book on this stuff and you didn't end up where you thought you were going to end up.
I didn't, no.
That's how hard you sat down, you had this research before you did the book, and you still didn't end up where you thought you'd be. That's how complicated this stuff gets.
Yeah, exactly. There were so many things that I was just flat out wrong about. And there's still stuff I'm wrong about, or there's stuff that, like, it's funny. I was talking to my dad about this, and it's like, my dad's like, you're kind of an expert on this thing, and I'm kind of like, Dad, I'm still learning. I'm still reading studies every day. I'm still trying to learn as much as I can. I'm not an expert on this. I'm still, there's still new, and there's still new stuff coming out that I'm like, oh, I hadn't seen this. Let me read this. Let me pick it apart. Let me figure out what's going on. So, again, we should do that, and it should change. We're going to continue learning more about it. So,
this is an important point because autism specifically, but disability stuff more broadly, or anybody that has any kind of a challenge to doing anything in public, let's just broaden it out to that. You have to give people room. Because 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, it's going to change. Nonverbal people now have smartphones that they can communicate with anybody instantly. Yes. We have people with things like autism starting to show up in public service in pretty high office.
Yes.
These things are changing. How important is it, not just from the research you did and the book you did, but just being a reporter and seeing these things? Part of people with challenges is giving them enough room so that they can get that next 1 or 2 steps forward, and then making sure they got room to take another step or 2 past that. That's not really a policy position. It's just kind of a life philosophy.
It is.
But that's where we're really failing on a lot of this stuff. Is like, that's the benevolent thing we just said. We're like, oh, I want to help, so I'm going to get my hands around this thing so much that it's never going to move out of this one thing now that I understand it, and it can't be anything else. Yeah. That's part of the problem here too. You got to give this stuff some space.
You got to give it room to grow. You got to give it room to change. And I think that's one of the things that I always recognize is that, like, look, we were, again, ASD was not, autism spectrum disorder was not a formal diagnosis until 13 years ago. I was a senior in college when it came out, when it was published. So, and that now I'm 34, folks. So time goes by. But the point that I'm making is that this stuff changes, and we should welcome and accept it. So I think giving enough room to grow and not constricting it to that only thing, I think that's the most destructive part of Trump and RFK saying just a few years ago it was 1 in 10,000. Yeah, because that was our understanding at the time. But we should be able to readjust our priors, and I always try to readjust my priors whenever I'm presented with new information.
Yeah, you need to read the whole book. I want to ask you about the new book a little bit. Don't give away the good stuff, but I think it flows in this conversation because the online part, the conspiratorial part, the feedback loop, we now got data on this. It's not just an opinion and it's not just a trope online, but young men, and especially young men with societal issues, let's keep it real broad. Any kind of people skills, social interaction issues, highly susceptible to online nonsense. So you're actually researching now specifically young men with these kind of issues, but you're also watching this happen real time because, and again, we've got the data now, the Trumpian MAGA stuff really appeals to that demographic. They're sucking that up like water in the desert. What are you finding? Because you've got 2 tracks, man. You're researching the book on this, but it's playing out right in front of you at the same time.
Yeah, no, I literally turned in my chapter on this like 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, to my editor, and it was funny because it's like, it is kind of a surrealistic experience to see it happen in real time while you're writing it. First draft of history, folks. But I think one of the things that I've learned more and more is that, and what I try to emphasize to people is that autistic people themselves are not susceptible to extremism in and of itself. It's social exclusion that leads them to extremism. And so again, the antidote to extremism is inclusion and acceptance. There was a really, really great study by a person who's become a really good friend of mine, Noah Sasson, a professor at the University of Texas, Dallas. And it was interesting because his study showed that a lot of that when people display autistic traits, neurotypical people are less likely to befriend them. But when autistic people see other people with autistic traits, there's another study that showed they kind of treat it as a neutral. So I think that like just treating it as a neutral and just like not judging people right off the bat if they display kind of autistic traits is a good starting point. And I think that like not treating disability as a good or a bad, but just like as it is a good starting point. So.
All right, Eric Garcia, there's a filter for a lot of this stuff. I'm just going to tee you up on it. There's hand holding, hand up, and a hand out.
Yeah.
That's the filter. Break those down for folks when they're dealing with anybody with, any kind of a challenge like this at all, but specifically autism folks. But hand out, hand up, and hand holding. Yeah. One's good, one's kind of helpful, one's really helpful.
Hand up is, I think, probably incredibly helpful. I think that it's just like helping people do it and recognizing that you're not in control of them, because hand holding, at the end of the day, when you're holding someone's hand, and when you're giving them a handout, there still are strings attached, and at the end of the day, you're the person who still has kind of the control. But if you just give them a hand up, then they could stand on their own 2 feet, or roll on their own 2 feet, or use crutches on their use their crutches, however they get around. But just that hand up and making sure, because then that allows them to push themselves and speak for themselves. If you're doing any of the other ones, another person is still in control. And what we want is autistic people and people with disabilities as a whole to be the ones in control of their lives. So,
yeah, and that's one thing. So you can pitch the book, and we can kind of round it off with this. Is you wrote the book? It's pretty much. It's got all the heavy research in it, but it's not written for researchers, which a lot of the autism material is. A lot of it's at the research level or the academic level.
Yeah,
it's dense. It's hard to get through. You keep it more on a practical level. You tell a lot of really great stories, really great families, a couple of them that I've gotten to talk to on social media now, which is kind of really wild to me. Talk about it on that level, that a lot of this stuff, kind of the counterbalance to some of the online nonsense, is also having good quality material that is also relatable and practical to daily life.
Yeah, I mean, that was the point that I wanted to make, because I wanted to, again, to your point, I wanted it to be a plain read. I wanted the book to be a plain read, which is to say that, like, because, growing up, I used to fly, from DC, when I went to college in North Carolina, all the way back to California. So I would just read books on the plane, or I would sleep. I wanted it to be something that I could read on a cross-country flight and, be done with it. And the same way, I'm so fortunate that I met so many great people in the book. And I think what I wanted to show was that just how normal their lives are, and just how they go through a lot of other things, and how they have some obstacles that are different from others, but just how similar their life experiences are to everybody else's. And everybody who knows me knows I don't take myself seriously, but I take those stories that they told me and what they've entrusted with me, I take that very seriously. I joke that, like, when people tell me their stories, and again, this is the same deal that I'm doing in the book, I treat it like the red words in the Bible. It's holy writ. I try to encapsulate it, but I do not water it down. I don't give it. I try to keep it as accurate as possible, because they trusted me for a reason, and I want to vindicate that trust. So.
All right, back to the day job. Congress will be back here shortly as we're recording this. We got about a week to go. They'll fly back. We have fly out day. We have fly in day, right?
Yep.
Congress comes back. It's going to be a lot of noise and nonsense. There's going to be quite a push on a lot of this Make America Healthy stuff, again, because they think they got a better chance of passing that. Give folks a couple headlines to kind of keep their eye on. And not only that, but, we're going to have to look at these committees, because all of a sudden now we've got a lot of resignations. We got a CDC director that may or may not be fired. We got to figure that one out.
Yeah, I know, right?
Give folks a couple headlines to really pay attention to on some of this health stuff coming up in the next couple weeks, because it's going to be really loud, because they have more control over that than some of the other stuff that's going into failure theater.
Yeah, so going into shutdown failure theater, which is my favorite season, I would look at the appropriations committee and look at what money they're allocating in the final healthcare budgets in the final HHS part of the appropriations budget. What money is actually going to MAHA efforts, and then what parts are they just completely like, we're not funding that. That's really the power, is just like how much discretion and what things they're going to concede to RFK Jr. on. with appropriations and what stuff they're just saying, we're not funding this. We're not giving this a dime.
Who do you think the players are for that? We know RFK Jr., but who's actually to watch for on the House and the Senate side of this? Because look, legislation has to have its shepherd to get it through. We know RFK is going to do it. Trump's going to pair whatever they say. Who in Congress and the Senate are we actually watching here?
Tom Cole on the Appropriations Committee. He's the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. He's a Republican. He's fairly close with Trump, so Tom Cole is going to be the one to watch. Brett Guthrie over on Energy and Commerce, which is in charge of healthcare on the House side. On the Senate side, it's going to be the obvious subject. Senator Susan Collins is the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee. She has a very interesting relationship with RFK Jr. She really doesn't like a lot of the Doge cuts because guess what? She's the one who's supposed to write the budget. And then, of course, Senator Bill Cassidy is also going to be the big one. He's up for re-election next year. He's a senator from Louisiana. He's a physician, and he really risked his credibility as a physician to confirm RFK Jr. So he's going to be the one to watch because he needs to keep Trump happy because guess what? A few years ago, he voted to convict Donald Trump for January 6th, and he said on television he would never vote for Donald Trump again. So he's got to be on his best behavior, and I think that's a big reason why he's letting RFK Jr. get away with a lot of stuff he's getting away with.
Yeah. All right. And culturally, where do you see this going? Take the whole spectrum of it, everything from the stereotype and the train jokes all the way to the really malicious viral and vaccine stuff and this and that causes autism. Where do you see the cultural debate over autism going here in the near future? Really
tough to say. I would say that we don't necessarily even know because we don't know how a virus is going to mutate. I think that MAHA, what I'm really going to be looking to when RFK drops this September report, and I actually think this is just going to be my prediction is that I think when the actual MAHA report is going to come out, it's going to be to RFK Jr. what the Pam Bondi Epstein files was. It's going to so disappoint people that it's not that they might even turn against RFK Jr. But I think what I'm looking at right now is after we get this autism epidemic report, what are going to be the kind of crank cures or treatments that they're going to do? And one of the things that I would say is that in response, I think what you're seeing is a lot of the autistic self-advocacy and infrastructure. I think that they're going to have to be, they've always been political. A lot of them are politically savvy. I'm not dismissing them, but I think that they're going to have to be much more, they're now going to have to be, they're going to have to learn to be a combat advocacy group. And what I mean by that is that they're going to have to know how to go on the warpath. They're going to have to know how to fight and throw punches, not just not just bring a policy paper. So,
and in the long term, that's bad. But in the short term, that's the world that got creative, and that's one of the reasons that people like me that get yelled at for being squishy middle and saying calm down all the time and think long term. No, this is really why you think long term, because okay, do we really want health science that's on a war footing at all times because they have to be, because that's the only way they survive? That's not good.
Yeah, for the short term, it's what they got to do, but for the long term, it's not necessarily the best. So.
Terrible. Eric Garcia, he wrote We Are Not Broken. It's been out for a couple of years. You can get it readily. We're going to put links all over all our stuff. Go out, buy it. I did. I've read it. It is Mother Donaldson approved, who was a 35-year special education teacher. She liked the book, and she went through those wars. I was laughing. You brought up the 1990 legislation. I tell my mom got a real classroom. They made her teacher of the year, and that legislation was going through. And they're like, the TV crew's coming. Maybe she shouldn't be in the custodial closet. We should probably get her a classroom. But that stuff happened, and people don't even know it happened. I was like 10, 11 years old. This was not that long ago.
It's not that long ago at all. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Eric Garcia, let folks know where they can keep up with you. We will tag and give all the links to the book, but let folks know where you're doing both the day job and what you got cooking on the advocacy front.
So yes, I'm working. So you can follow me on social media at Eric M. Garcia on X and Blue Sky, whatever Elon's calling Twitter these days. And then obviously by the book. The next book is going to be coming out sometime in the fall of 2026. So literally tonight I'm going to be working on more of it. So anyway. That's where it is. Follow me over at the Independent. We're keeping an eye on this. We ain't done with this at all. So,
Yep. You enjoy your last couple days of relative ease and comfort, because after next week, it's going to be go, go, go until probably November-ish.
November, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hang in there, buddy. Great congressional reporter. He's become a really good friend, and I appreciate you greatly. Eric Garcia, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Let's go.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.